Welcome to Case Files, the human factor. We are going to unpack and explore human behavior. And human behavior is fascinating. We're going to look at trauma, victimology, and I'm going to use all of my expertise over the last 25 years to really give you the gift of understanding human behavior and the fascination we've got with psychopathology, crime, victimology, criminal justice, mental health, forensics and statutory cases. And with that, I will, on my own and with the assistance of some of my guest speakers, really give you insight in what the human factor means in our lives and our daily existence. Welcome to the human factor. We're going to discuss today quite an interesting topic that lies really close to my heart because that was my initial specialisation and entry into the field. And we're going to speak about exotic dances and sex work. And I just want to, from the outset, say that I do not intend, and there's no intention to create a misconception that all exotic dancers are sex workers or that sex workers do sort of exotic dancing as well. It's two separate practices, but it is important that we look at it holistically, just that I can explain some of the personality sort of traits that goes along what happens when you're in more of an industry where there is some exhibitionistic traits or transactional traits of where there's sex or exoticness. I just want us to look at that. I was actually asked by one of my clients that is in the industry to just speak openly about it because there's a lot of misconceptions. There is a lot of dehumanization that comes with the industry that is, there's a sadness to it because I do think we need to look at the human factor of someone that is in this industry and really understand what that person is also going through. So to give a bit of an introduction, when I just finished my bachelor's degree, I went into a master's program. And when I was doing my master's program in Johannesburg in South Africa, I was asked to do my practicals in a sex club. And a part of that was to speak to some of the sex workers, to emotionally support them, to look at, it was for females, so their female health as well. And as someone that was at that stage, I think I was 20, and came from quite a conservative background, an Afrikaans conservative background, it was quite new for me. And I really needed to look at my own biases, my own judgments, and really be open to support and to meet the sex workers where they were at. So it is interesting for me how everything goes in round circles. And here I am 25 years later, sitting still and talking about the topic. And through the years, I've had the absolute it has been fortunate because I have seen in my practice the sex workers and from their perspective what they've gone through as humans in the industry, and also the exotic dancers, what they've gone through being exotic dancers. But then I also see the person on the other side that uses the services and how they experience it, and from their perspective what that is all about. And then I've also been in the field to see, but how does that work? What is the exploitation in the industry? What is the mental health? How does that look like? Going into some of these clubs, looking at how people are being treated, the repercussions as well, mental health-wise, for some of the people in the industry, from someone that is doing some of the services to the management level as well, and then speaking to practitioners that is involved in the industry and to speak to some about how do they treat some of the sex workers or the exotic dancers that come to their practices, or that have got legal ramifications of certain things that happens, because they are a vulnerable population group. So the risk, because it's a risky industry, so the risk to violence, the risk to healthcare ramifications, mental health complexities is huge. And just to have that perspective as well from the professionals has really helped me to develop insight of the human side, to just listen to that and to see what can we do in this industry. In some countries, there's legislation that governs. In some countries, it's illegal. So there's certain ramifications for that as well. But really look through a compassionate lens and a non-biased lens at what can we do to meet the sex industry of where they are at, and really seeing the people in the industry as humans. So that is what we're going to look at. And I'm going to start off today's podcast just reading a piece with consent of one of the sex workers, that you can really get an insight from their perspective of how they are feeling. So I'm going to read this piece to you that you can really understand, and I want you to listen to this, even if there may be judgments or if there's openness, or I want you to look at it through a human lens and see the person that has written this piece, and to really try and get an understanding if this was your friend, a family member, and let's look at it from a compassionate perspective. I want you to, at the end of this podcast, really think about the compassion. Try and sort of put all of the judgments, all of the negativity, all of your biases, all of the dehumanization of your own lens that you're looking through, and just put that aside for a moment, and let's just sort of meet a fellow human being with a compassionate outlook and a compassionate sort of connection. So let me start with this letter, where it starts with, "Dear reader, I don't know who you are, but I imagine you might already have an opinion about me. Maybe you think you know my story because of what I do for a living. Maybe you've judged me before even reading these words. But I'm writing this because behind every label, sex worker, prostitute, escort, there's a human being, and I want you to see me." I just want to add here while I'm reading, this is often what I see when I work with the sex worker or the dancer, is they want people to connect with them outside of the industry as fellow human beings. And they are often saying that they lose their humanity because they see a dark side of life. And it's important that they are seen as humans, and they want to be seen. Their whole self is not what they do, like all of us. I'm not just what I do professionally. There is so much more to me. But let's give that same sort of feeling and connection to the person in this industry. I didn't grow up dreaming of doing this work. My childhood wasn't filled with fairy tales of bright futures. It was filled with fear. I grew up in a house where love was supposed to be safe, but it wasn't. My father, the person that should have protected me, hurt me in ways I still can't fully talk about without feeling like I'm breaking into pieces. My mother knew, but pretended not to. That silence was almost worse than the abuse itself. It taught me early on in my life that pain didn't matter, that my voice did not matter. And I see that, and I want to advocate on this point in reading this letter, that the sex worker or the dancer, the exotic dancer, their pain, and they often, if you look at it statistically, they do come from a background of pain. They do come from a background where they do not have a voice. There's a high correlation where some of the, and I speak today perhaps more because I've just worked in that specific field, where female sex workers or transgender sex workers and some of the male sex workers, I work more with the female sex workers, but they often have not had a voice in their childhood, specifically in their formative years. I see, and I've seen and looked at the research because I've done a lot of research in this industry, that their voice was taken away from them and they want a voice as well. So let's give them the opportunity going forwards in modernized society, that the sex worker and the exotic dancer do have more of a voice, to voice their pain of their history, to voice why they are in the industry, to voice what are their needs going forward, that we can make it a safer and healthier industry to be in, that is more regulated. So just to look at sort of the letter again, when I finally got out of that house, I was just a teenager with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I carried the weight of those years like a scar carved into my soul. I wanted more than anything to build a better life, to escape the shadows of the past. But trauma doesn't just disappear because you leave the place where it started. It follows you. It whispers in your ear that you're worthless, that you're broken beyond repair. And often I see that in our therapeutic space with the individuals in this industry, is that there is such a lot of pain that they've internalized. They feel broken, they feel fractured, and they feel that they cannot be repaired, and they want to desperately feel that they are repaired. And my approach in therapy is not to repair, because I'm not in the industry of fixing people. I'm in the industry of navigating what people have gone through in their life and the trauma that they've experienced, to see it and to attach to it and have a different relationship with that pain. So we look at the shadow, and from a psychoanalytical perspective as well, we do a lot of shadow work. We look at dark spots in our lives, and with some of my patients, specifically in this industry, that is really healing, to start to feel that you can navigate the trauma of the past and to rebuild your life. So for this person, they fell into the sex work out of desperation. I was homeless, I was hungry, and I was terrified. The first time I exchanged sex for money, I cried afterwards, not because I felt dirty, but because I felt relieved. Relieved that I could eat. Relieved that I could pay for a motel room and not have to sleep on the park bench. People always assume we're either victims or vixens, but the truth is, sometimes we're survivors. And I do believe that when you sit with some of these individuals, you can feel the survival that they've gone through. There's a transference that I can feel in my session as well, where these are survivors of what they've gone through. And I want to applaud that, because it is not that easy sort of to look through a judgmental lens people say, but there's lots of options. Why can't they do something else? You don't have to exchange sex for money. You don't have to go sort of to that transactional state in life. I want to invite those people with those views to actually sit with someone where they've gone through that kind of journey in their life and know and feel the desperation that they've gone through, because that gives you some first-hand understanding that sometimes that is the only option. When you are hungry, when you are sitting in perhaps a country where there's not specific resources available, when you sit in fear, you will do anything. Some of these individuals have children as well that they have to feed. They don't know where their next sort of few dollars or rands or kwachas or anything is going to come from. When you start feeling that, then you will know that sometimes you will do anything for money, even if it is transactional in a sexual capacity, or if it is in a place where you have to perhaps sort of take your clothes off, where some other individuals voyeur and look and touch and exploit. But that is sometimes your only option. Over time, sex work became more than just survival. It became a way for me to reclaim control over my body, the very thing that had been taken from me so many times before. But society doesn't see that. You see the transactional and assume it means I have no self-respect. You see my job and assume you know my worth. Do you know how it feels to walk down the street and see people look right through you, like you're invisible, or worse, like you're disgusting? Do you know how it feels when doctors refuse to treat you with dignity, when landlords won't rent to you, when even your own family looks at you with shame, but in the same capacity will take your money from you because of their own desperation or exploitation? I do. But what hurts the most isn't the judgment. It's the fact that people think they're better than me, like their mistakes don't count because they aren't written in neon letters. I've seen people in high places do things far worse than anything that I've ever done. But it seems that in sort of the economical world, or sort of in business where it's not transactional, sex or my clothes, it's different. It's being treated with more respect than what I could ever be treated. I've always done this, but they get to hide behind their titles and their suits, and they get away with what I can't imagine to do to other people. But for them, I'm just a whore in their eyes. But here's what you don't see. I'm also a person with dreams and fears and love in my heart. I'm someone who reads poetry late at night when I can't sleep. I'm someone who cries when I watch a sad movie and laughs until my stomach hurts with my friends. I'm someone who wakes up early and take my children to school. I'm someone who wants more out of life, but I refuse to feel ashamed for how I've survived. I've learned in therapy that I need to stand up and I need to look people right in the eye, and I need to go on with my life because I'm a survivor. I've learned that the world doesn't give you many options when you're born into pain, but I've also learned that survival is its own kind of strength. Just want to stand still on that, because I often say this in some of the sessions, and I've often said that when I've worked with people in this industry, is that some people are born into pain Some people are born into poverty, but that does not mean that you have to hold on to this pain or that you have to hold on to this poverty. You can shift it and place it in a place where you can have a different connection with that. And I want people that listen to this podcast to really understand this, that people can shift and navigate what they've gone through, even in challenging situations. There is hope, there is joy, but you need to develop a different relationship with some of the things that you are born into. I've built a life for myself out of the broken pieces. And while it may not look like the life you chose for me, I had to choose it, and I had to make the best out of my circumstances. And I deserve respect just like anyone else. So the next time you see someone like me, I hope you remember this letter. I hope you'll see the past, the labels, and remember that we're all just people trying to make it through this life the best way we can. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find it into your heart to offer understanding instead of judgment. Because behind every story like mine is a person who just wanted to be seen. Not a mistake. They wanted to be seen as a human being. With all my truth, and the name is withheld. And I just want to say, for the person that has written this and for so many others, and that is why I've decided to dedicate this podcast on this, is I really want people to also see that these are human beings, are not a mistake. They are here to also have a journey in life and to make and to create a life that can be the best possible journey that they can have. It's a tough journey. It comes with many complexities, but there is resources available. And I want people not in the industry to start understanding how can we help? How can we address this with dignity to meet the people in the industry with human dignity and to stop dehumanizing the work that many of these individuals were forced into or had to do this because of no other options. If we look at just some of the statistics, and I'm not going to go through that for this podcast's sake, I'm just going to talk to you of some of the experience that I've seen. There's a large percentage of people that go into the industry because of significant trauma. And a lot of the trauma sits in those first 7 years of developmental years, in the formative years of these individuals, where there's been moral condemnation, a dehumanization of the person, of the child's spirit, through family violence, through children that have been placed in the foster system or that have gone through court processes where they were sort of jumped from one family to another family. Kids that grew up on the streets, street children, they had to sort of really survive, and sort of the survival of the fittest game sort of started becoming their lifestyle. There's also a large number of individuals where they've been sexual assault, and as what you could see in this letter as well, the pain that they hold on to, that then sort of later on in life became a method, a coping mechanism to be in control of the pain. So a lot of psychological and mental struggles that emerge and develop that really sort of sits with these people that need support, that needs assistance, that needs to understand that we can navigate that with good health care. I often hear from my clients that they say they've been to a number of therapists, they've been to a number of GPs to get assistance, or when they run into legal trouble, that they sit with their solicitors. And the first thing that they feel in the space with these individuals, these professionals, are utter judgment. And I have learned through my years in practice as well to sit and to hold the pain with these people, with these humans, and they can feel that. And I just want to encourage also more professionals to really look at their own biases, to look at their own judgments, because that gets transferred in a lot of their consultations. And they really need to look at that, because this industry needs us to really take their hand and to sit with them, that they understand and feel understood with what they are going through. There's a lot of stereotyping, misrepresentation of what certain people do and who they are as people and as humans. They're not just someone that has sex for a transaction. They are so much more. They are often mothers or fathers. They are friends. They do other work as well. They perhaps are into fitness, or they love, they're passionate about dancing, away from the exotic sort of dancing. But there is a whole persona, a whole human behind that person. So that is what they want us to see, not just the industry that perhaps they had to choose, or perhaps that chose them. So I want to really look at, for people to understand, let's stop dehumanizing the sex worker. Let's start and really embracing and understanding why this is happening and what can we do about this on a micro level, but also a macro level, that there is not further exploitation and dehumanization in this industry, because we can do so much more to really make sure that there's not victimization of these people that needs help, support, and understanding. Also, often there's double standards. There's a lot of hypocrisy in this industry. We need to address that fully through litigation, through legal instruments, through talking about it openly, that we can really give some voice and understanding of a large part of society is using these services, are in these services. What are we doing really about it? That it can be more of a healthy lens that we look through, a proactive lens, a preventative lens, to make sure that we shift and we change, that we get the results that we need, that there isn't hurt and pain, and that becomes the journey of the people that are in these industries. Also, the criminalization and the legal harassment, and just the unfairness of the industry and the system. I often sit with individuals that there's a transactional part of their service delivery, but they get misunderstood when something goes wrong. Because let's also just be real, a lot of these things are not transactional. That happens behind the scenes, where a sex worker or a dancer may be sexually assaulted, may be harassed, they may be threatened. Where do they go to? Who do they speak to? The pain that they go through, the mental process, what do they do legally that they feel supported, that they feel safe? There isn't a lot of options for them. In certain countries, there's more options, but in others, it's criminalized. They can't speak to anyone about really what has happened. So very important that we look at how do we keep every person worldwide as safe as possible. For me, one of the biggest journeys and one thing that I always try and achieve through life is how do we create safety for each and every person with legislation, with advocacy work, because we really, as humans, one of our core needs and one of the most important things in life is people want to feel safe. So we do need to look at the lack of legal protection and resources in this industry for people because they need to feel a sense of safety. We also obviously need to look at preventative measures to see how do we act preventatively that people do not have to go through the pain, not go through the exploitation that they have to perhaps go through in some of these industries. There's a lot of discrimination in healthcare. There's a lot of discrimination in social services in this industry. And the more we talk about it and the more people listen to us talking, the more we will actually create sort of the human factor in it. We will stop dehumanizing people and we will actually look at we meeting humans, fellow humans, at where they need to be met. But that is not always that easy for people. That comes with judgment, that comes with a perspective of terrorizing other people, of looking down at other people. That is what we really need to address in this specific industry if we want to facilitate change. We also have to ask ourselves is why is this happening in society? It's been happening forever, as long as I can remember. If you look at the writings, if you look at the research, this has been happening for many, many centuries and years, and we need to look at what can we do to really address this fully. Big aspect, and perhaps the last point that I want to consider is the violence and safety concerns. We need to look at an increase vulnerability to violence in this industry. A lot of physical violence, additional sexual violence, psychological violence, gaslighting, manipulation. We need to look at all of that. We have to remember the sex workers and some of our exotic dancers, they go back to families often. They go back home to being a mom or a dad. They go back to a partner. How do we act preventatively that they are not so vulnerable to violence? How do we act responsibly as fellow humans that we can assist, we can support, and that we can be there for them, that they do not fear reporting crimes and that they don't feel so unsafe in their own working conditions? So I just want to end this podcast by saying to some of the people that are in the industry and some of the humans that is outside of the industry, let's not dehumanize each other, but let's look at the human factor that perhaps got everyone where they are at in life, and let's just sort of act preventatively. Let's sort of speak to someone's vulnerability, and let's be able to stand up and to look and to give voice and to advocate to facilitate change in society. So I really hope that this podcast provided just some insights on the life of someone that has lived through that journey, and to perhaps look at a different lens when you look at someone's life in that industry. Thank you for listening to The Human Factor. This was a good conversation to bring light to the topic.